A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I have another book review for you. This is a book that I read for Victober, so it's been a few months. But I wanted to finally get the review in on this. It's David Crystal's That's the Ticket for Soup, Victorian Views on Vocabulary as Told in the Pages of Punch. It's not a very large book. Print is rather on the small end, though. Although it is filled with a lot of cartoons. I'm calling them cartoons because I think that's what they used to call them back then. You know, it's not cartoons the way we think of it, but, you know, a lot of pictures with, you know, the type they would have had underneath it for actual Punch magazine. Is it Punch magazine or Punch newspaper? Anyway, for Punch. I actually found this to be kind of disappointing. It does have, you know, some interesting facts in there. Shares some amusing slang words of the time, things that some of them which have passed on, you know, to current day, others which have not and seem really weird looking back upon them. However, I found this, even though it's a short book, to feel quite long and a bit dry. And you know, that's kind of like, I prefer a factual book, and I think it wasn't. My problem with this book is it basically felt like a long complaint piece, which is kind of funny since I'm complaining about this book. But it felt basically like you had like a couple of old guys sitting on their lawn and complaining about kids and how they talk of these days, you know. And okay, which is also funny because I do complain about how writing has, you know, degraded in quality these days. So I guess I'm basically the guys in Punch that I'm complaining about. But yeah, it just felt like I walked into a gentleman's club where a bunch of these elderly men were complaining about, you know, how kids are going, you know, basically hell in a handbasket, and, you know, oh my gosh, the way they talk and the way they act, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was interesting to see how much of the slang has stayed, evolved, or has completely disappeared. It does have fun artwork in it, but and I mean, some of the humor is quite fun. I do admit to that. Like, in particularly the humor that's underneath the pictures, the little, you know, zingers, those are fun. The longer articles that the writers for Punch wrote, the harangue pieces, little less fun, especially when they start becoming repetitive. Well, I feel like I'm really talking about myself, which is kind of embarrassing. At least I'm self-aware. But apparently, this explains where the saying, "That's the ticket for soup," comes from, and that's apparently where we get the shorter saying, "That's the ticket," which I was not familiar with. I actually, you know, I don't think I've heard of anyone say "that's the ticket" anymore. So I'm just going to take how they explain the term "that's the ticket for soup." So the one that's on the front of the book. And like I said, I really wanted to like this book better than I did. And maybe I need to give it another read and another chance. But yeah, I wanted it to be more than what I got. I don't know what I expected. But, so how is "that's the ticket for soup" actually used? So, a ticket for soup was a card given to beggars to go to a soup kitchen. It seems to have initially carry the meaning, You've got what you came for, so now be off with you. But it gradually softened, influenced by the wider use of ticket to mean the needed, correct, or fashionable thing to do, as in the expression still heard, that's the ticket. The dominant meanings became, that's the ticket. The dominant means became, that's the way you'll get what you want, and that's the way you'll get rich. So I thought that was interesting. Like I said, I don't think anyone says that's a ticket anymore, or maybe I'm just not exposed to people who use that. It just kind of seems like it's kind of faded out of fashion, although things do come back around. But like, I did enjoy like random things, like finding out that turnip was an old-fashioned watch with a heavy silver coating, and I finally I finally found out what it was meant by, what Agatha Christie meant when she said that Poirot had a turnip watch. I always thought that he has, and I thought this was weird. I always thought like he had a watch that looked like a turnip, and I didn't understand why this like dandy of a guy would have a watch looking like a turnip. It sounded so weird to me. Well, apparently, like I said, it's an old-fashioned watch with a heavy silver covering, which made a lot more sense to me explaining Poirot's turnip face watch. So at least it's cleared up that confusion for me, because I don't know why I never looked it up. I just was like, that's weird. Why would he have a turnip watch? I mean, like, weird. I guess it goes with his egg-shaped head. I don't know. It just, because I hadn't heard of the saying and I didn't realize it was slang. I thought I took it literally. I'm just trying to see anything else. I mean, I gave this a 2.5. It probably deserves better than that. Like I said, I think another reading, I could probably give it a better rating. I think part of it is it became repetitive. A bit of a, like I said, a bunch of guys hanging out saying, these young people nowadays, how they talk. But some of this slang is interesting. And it was funny how much got blamed on Americans, because of course Punch is British, how much got blamed on us, even if it wasn't necessarily related to us. And you see a little bit of that in, I want to say, it's called Final Curtain. No, it was a Quick Curtain. It was called Quick Curtain. It was a book that I read earlier in the year. It was a British Library crime classic. And throughout, the father the police detective is scolding his son for using Americanisms like okay. So it was funny. It was amusing to see that reflected in Punch, where they're complaining about Americanisms or things that here's the section right here, page 41, avoid Americanisms. And there is a point where the author of this book notes that it's ironic that one of the words that is mentioned actually predated America, but it was being blamed on Americans. So when in doubt and it wasn't something they like, it was easier to blame us. Yeah, and there's a couple times where that happened. So, and oh my gosh, there's like a whole chapter on Americanisms, and oh my gosh, America, they have ruined our language forever. What shall the world do? So, but I think every generation complains about how the next generation is ruining the use of language, how it's less thoughtful. I think you can look at almost any work of any time and you can hear the same refrain. It's kind of oddly comforting to see that some things will always remain the same. Politicians will be politicians forever and for always, and they just change who they are within the time period. It's just they're gonna politic. And the older people are going to complain about the younger people and how kids back in my day and how the loss of old-fashioned values, And the young people are going to complain about the old people, how they aren't quite with the times. It's something that you can go back, and it's just a cycle through generations. It's just, it's just a human cycle, which is, like I said, funny, but also oddly comforting because, it's going to come around. It's going to come around again. What was, in previous generations will come back in a revival. Hopefully we will see an improvement in writing styles and in an appreciation of language as time goes on, maybe when things cycle back through again. Or who knows? I mean, language is a constantly changing thing. It's constantly fluid. It's a living entity. So no matter how much we bemoan the changes of language and how it has degraded or how it's just not as pretty or just where it just seems almost bleh. It just doesn't have the same flow that it used to. The fact of the matter is that language isn't going to stay static because it's a part of human culture, which is also living. And as we change as people, so is language. And this is kind of just a, reminder of that. Things that, they saw as being language changes that, were reflective of, the youth taking on Americanisms or, degradation of morality or whatever the fears happen to be. Those particular figures of speech, not all of them even stayed, and other ones replaced them that either brought up the same panic or, just passed on their way as, again, times changed. There's a reason I think that we wouldn't even, if you take into account the fact that, you have the great vowel shift and, so things might sound a bit different anyway if you talk to someone back from the Revolutionary War era. The fact of the matter is as well, our slang is different. Our way of thinking is different. It's the living language, just even though we might share a language, the essentials of the language is the same. You even notice that if you have someone who's more online where the norms of language is constantly changing, there's constantly new slang, constantly things that pop in and out of popularity, constant trends of language. If you're a bit chronically online, you find yourself absorbing these changes of the living language in spite of yourself, and you don't even realize you're doing it until you talk to someone who is less chronically online and hasn't absorbed as much of this fluidity and constant changing of the language. So even though during the time of Punch it wouldn't have been in as quick and constant a manner that language changes now, because it's so easy to get in contact with people across the globe. It's so quick now, almost instantaneous, or actually pretty much instantaneous. For them, it seemed to be something that was alarming. And, probably, and it seemed to seem dramatic to them. I think if they would look at how quickly and how constantly our slang and figures of speech are changing, I think that some of these poor guys from Punch, I think their heads would spin off their necks. So while I do empathize to a certain extent with the way some of these guys feel, just because, sorry, my alarm went off, I do have a love for language and for having things written and said in a way that is just it can be musical or it can be lyrical, or it can be just has a loveliness to it in a way that some things that are written now just don't. So while I can appreciate them mourning or regretting the changes of the language, unfortunately, you can't stop the change of language. You can encourage and teach and bring to the forefront some of these classics and history books and some things that, make it so that way internet speak and blog posts aren't going to become the only way that we experience language in our culture, because we don't want to lose a more thoughtful way of writing and talking and just kind of degenerate into like sound bites and just sort of rambly things like I'm doing here. But that's where it's so important to encourage classics to our kids, encourage other people, adults or whatnot, just to read the classics, to engage with the more challenging way to think, to read, to write, to speak. We could just be like the guys in Punch and, complain about, the kids these days and how the language is degrading. We can do that, and sometimes that's fun. But, let's go a step further than that. That's where we can have the benefits of a booktube. And also with interaction with people in our lives. Say, hey, check out this book. There's a reason it's a classic. It doesn't have to be necessarily even, yes, you could give a history book, or you can give a War and Peace and some of these really, heavier things to read. Or you can even do something like an Agatha Christie, where it still has a level of language that I feel that some modern books are lacking. I mentioned that I got rid of a book called Chemistry Test because I just felt like the writing was poor. It was really annoying. So you don't have to necessarily present writing that has to be like cerebral, like seem cerebral. You can get classic fiction that's easy to engage with, but still without someone necessarily even realizing completely, they are still challenging themselves to a higher reading level, a higher way of thinking, a more in-depth way of thinking, and engaging with something that's just a little bit more than a soundbite or something that's only surface level, because we do ourselves a disservice. And that's where it's, really our responsibilities, or it's just, if we want to do more than just wag our fingers and complain like the guys in Punch, then we, use our channels, promote these awesome books of the past, and encourage an improved language and a maintaining of what is good and beautiful in our literature, in our language, in our culture, through using, media to promote the books that made a lot of people experience the world in a different way. So I guess, sorry, I went and completely rambled with this one. I apologize to anyone who, or I thank any of you who managed to sit through this. Apologize for anyone who kind of felt like they just sort of had to stick it out a little bit longer. So would I recommend this book? I'm on the fence about this. I think that there is some interesting stuff in here, like I said. And although it's dry, I think there's enough interesting things that even if you give it a read through and slog through some of the drier parts, I think it could be a good read. Just keep in mind that it is a bit dry and can be a bit, complaining and repetitive. But sometimes it's done in an amusing enough way that it helps you get through some of the dry patches. Okay, I think I'm done rambling about That's a Ticket for Soup by David Crystal. Hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you the next time. God bless. Bye-bye.
Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.